Steve's mic might be turned off.
It's okay. I'll just use his.
Good evening, and welcome to the regular Wednesday, September 25th, 2019 meeting of the Public Works Advisory Board. We have two absences at this point right now. Chris and Janet are both not here, but we do have a quorum. We do have 4 members. So I will call the meeting to order. First, I'd like to thank Stu Skiff for his service on the board. He resigned at this past meeting, and I would encourage other people that might be interested in sitting on the board of the Public Works Advisory Board to keep an eye out for when the city might offer that position available for interviews. It's possible it may not occur until January, but just keep an eye out if you'd like to participate on the board. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to John Irwin, who has a brief statement he'd like to make, and I'll let him also introduce the moment of silence.
Yes, I'd like to have a moment of silence for the Caltrans engineer and his family that were involved in an accident 14 days ago, which resulted in the passing of his wife, and also to remind us that driving safely is a responsibility we share, and to remain vigilant while exercising that responsibility. And that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, thank you. And now is time for public comment period. Those members of the public that would like to make a statement that is not on an item that's city-related and not on the agenda, they can come up to the microphone at this time and make their statement. If not, then I will close public comment period and we'll go to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda are the minutes of August 21st, 2019. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as stated.
It's been moved as presented.
I second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the director's report, item B1. We'll give Rob a minute or two if he is ready.
I can small we have a microphone problem.
This one's dead.
Okay, we're doing a little technical adjustment right now. Rob will be with us in just a moment.
Yours is dead too. It's a conspiracy.
In the meantime, I'd like to offer my thanks to AGP Video and all of their members for all of the great work they do. And Rob's going to go up to the podium in order to make his presentation right now.
I hope this one works. Okay,
Go
good.
ahead.
So we've been, as you can see, fairly active, starting with consolidated maintenance, have done quite a bit of pavement repair. You'll notice that we needed to close down the Coleman Park restroom due to structural issues there. We noticed some cracks opening up on the walls there. That's a unreinforced masonry building. In fact, it likely has hollow cells in the block, just stacked block on a concrete slab, likely. We had a storm drain failure up on Sequoia Court that caused a sinkhole to open up. We've temporarily patched the road, but have not repaired the storm drain. That's about 250 so feet of 36-inch corrugated metal pipe. So it's will be a fair project. You can see from one of the pictures showing the holes in the bottom of the pipe. We couldn't get our video camera tractor down past those big gaping holes. Didn't want to lose a expensive piece of equipment down in there and do a confined space entry into a piece of pipe. But I would suspect, based on my experience with corrugated metal, if it looks like this in a couple of places, it's probably rotted all the way down the pipe like that. And it's relatively newer corrugated metal pipe, put in the mid-'80s, I believe, this piece of pipe was. So it's about 30-ish years old. Our fire department has been helping us with some restriping of red curb around the city, and they'll continue to do that. We've made some repairs at the Cloisters bike path, pedestrian path, where we've seen some erosion damage along the fence there.
Oh,
You can see they've been busy at the in the utilities section. Regarding our capital projects, really no change on the Highway 41 Main project. We are working with the design engineers now, GHD, who about a year ago purchased Omni Means, and we need to do a new contract with this new company to get them to continue forward. We're still working with SLOCOG on a funding mechanism to bring this to a fully funded project. We have about a $4 million gap that we need to fill on this project. It's about an $8 million roundabout project there. Pavement management, we're about to go out to RFP for pavement assessment services, and they'll help us with putting together some plans and specs for next year's pavement management plan that we plan on, the work they plan on doing next spring. Water system and collection systems improvements identified in the One Water plan. You can see I put together a schedule for delivering those three major projects that are composed of a bunch of little smaller projects. North Point, we are almost ready to list that project. We'll be replacing the metal halide fixtures with LED fixtures and adding one additional fixture in the parking at the end in the parking lot area to light that parking lot. Both PD and Homeowners Association have asked us for additional lighting down there at the end of the street. That'll be basically downcast lighting on a post that won't go over the kind of the berm that separates the park from the freeway there. Cloisters, incorporating community comments into the plan, and we'll be taking that to council next month for adoption. Still the same major projects in development review. The 23-lot subdivision at Bonita, Maine is nearing completion. I think they're probably looking for temporary certificates of occupancy for the rear units there to start to market those more actively. The Harborview Hotel, the one at the at Harbor and Embarcadero, is still in planning. Dollar Store and another dollar product is still looking to move into Cookie Crock. Harbor Hot Docks are in plan check. It's still been crickets from Sonic. Haven't seen a plan resubmittal from them addressing the plan check comments. The Coast Guard addition is in plan check, and Morro Bay Landing, which is the interesting roof design building there, in about the 1,200 block of Embarcaderos under construction. And we continue to have about 50 residential remodels in either plan check or construction. Still have the survey going for the bicycle-friendly community survey up and looking for comments on that. On the water reclamation facility, council approved a contract amendment with Waterworks engineers who are the design engineers for the lift station pipeline project. Due to changes in their scope, we added the injection well pipeline to their scope, and some additional potholing were the two major work efforts that for that contract amendment. And council reviewed and received the addendum to the final EIR, and there's a link to that. And that addendum addressed the change in alignment that we've been working on actually since the final EIR was presented to avoid some cultural resource issues. It addressed the addition of the second pump station at the lot next to Limos, and a few other minor changes in the alignment. That concludes kind of the overview, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob.
We may need to swap spots up here if there's.
Okay.
And Ms. Hanson and Mr. Miller weren't available today to come in, so we'll pinch hit for them.
All right. Thank you, Rob. I'll open it up for questions from the board. I'll start with John. And if you're referencing specific items in here, please give the page number so everyone can be on board with you. John?
Okay. Let's see. Things which popped up. You mentioned about $250,000 to fix that failed sewer or storm drain.
It's about 250 feet of pipe. We haven't done the assessment on it to how we're going to, whether we're going to try to line it or to pave the bottom of the invert or do a replacement for segments of that. We're still working on that and putting together estimates.
Okay, that was one thing.
It's not going to be a cheap project in any.
No, I know. Where is it? Under what intersection or street?
There's a cul-de-sac. Sequoia Court goes up off of Ironwood behind the Latter-day Saints Church. It's up at the top of there. Picks up a fairly large canyon that has quite a big drainage area and ends up discharging into Alpha Creek.
Okay.
Which is a creek that goes through Del Mar Park.
What's the usual peak flow velocity in that pipe? Just do you know?
No, it's laid at about 8% through that section there.
Okay, that explains it. So it just takes a few rocks to.
Yeah. I think the rocks have done quite a bit of damage through it.
Pavement management. Do you have a schedule for the revision yet?
Not yet. We're putting that schedule together.
What sort of information are you waiting for to finish that up?
Just time and resources to get it onto paper.
Okay. I had a couple other things I wanted to bring up. I'm still concerned about the crossings of North Main by Toro Creek and Alba Paul.
And I think we're talking about Morro Creek, right?
Morro Creek, yeah.
Morro Creek, okay. Yeah, because...
would it be possible to consider putting up a couple signs saying narrow bridge, just so people understand that things are going to get.
Okay. I was in the process this week of responding to your comments, and one of my questions was, what I didn't know the type of sign that you were looking at, but
there's a
narrow bridge sign is probably appropriate.
It was just a Caltrans sign.
Yeah.
And I talked to my contact at Caltrans, and he thought, well, there really isn't anything you can say for pedestrians on the road, but you can say narrow bridge. We'll say, okay, watch out. You're going to find unusual things occasionally
Yeah.
there.
We could also do, with a narrow bridge, do the advisory slow sign.
Okay.
Also.
Yeah, I mean, northbound on Alva Paul, that's the only one where it's really an issue. And then that brought up another issue. I was driving on North Main. I saw a young woman riding down the east side, on the legal side of the thing there. You may want to have some attention paid to knocking down the weeds along that fence, because it'll push the bike riders out into the right of way occasionally to get around it. And then the other thing, my wife and I was watching KSBY, and they were saying that is it Orchid, where they're going to have they're doing that enforcement thing for pedestrian sidewalks and stuff like that. And I brought it up before, but the intersection of San Jacinto and Greenwood is definitely not working the way people conceived it should work. And I guess, was it Wednesday, the police department and the school is going to have a safe ride to Del Mar, starting at Spencer's, but maybe the police can also add a thing where they'll do a enforcement where they'll just, nail people for going fast or not stopping for pedestrians there on San Jacinto too.
Yeah, I talked with the chief last night at the council meeting, and they occasionally do have an officer, the school resource officer, stationed at that intersection. And
we don't have a resource officer anymore. Or at least it was taken away 2 years ago when the school district went.
The school district's now paying it again, so we have a school
cool.
resource officer.
So it's been established.
Mainly at the high school, but occasionally over at Del Mar.
Yeah, well, to do what I've seen there, you need to have somebody step out in the sidewalk into the crosswalk when they see somebody coming and see if the car stops or not. And if they don't, then they get a ticket. And it's probably going to need something like that in order to burn in the concept of yielding the right-of-way to pedestrians there.
And it's generally during school drop-off and pickup time?
I've seen it, when my wife and I just go for a walk, it's still like you look both ways and then you look both ways again, because I've seen them do close to 50 down that.
It is a very wide street,
yes.
And it gives you the not the visual friction that
you might want to have.
You might want.
Yeah. Okay. But so I've noticed that. So those are the two things which kind of things that popped up as we could probably spiff up some of our bike and pedestrian safety issues here, especially on the North Morro Bay area.
The chief also suggested maybe that we work with the school district for, at least during the times of drop-off and pickup, to remind parents that there are other kids going to school also.
Yes.
I know I'm have in that situation now, dropping off in the morning, and it is rather hectic. I forgot how hectic it was at the high school to drop off.
Yeah. Okay. But those are the things which I kind of wanted to talk about. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Steve?
Okay. I only have one thing, Rob, and it is page 8 of 21, the CMP culvert. I guess my question is, I'm not a big fan of CMP, especially in coastal areas. Is this, and I assume it's city-owned CMP in their street, it's not a Caltrans cross culvert somewhere.
Correct. It's up by Del Mar Park.
Okay, do you still spec CMP as a product?
No.
Oh, okay, that's the main thing I want to check. HDPE or RCP or something that doesn't.
Mainly HDPE. We have put some new concrete pipe in when we built the roundabout, but
okay.
For the most part, it's HDPE.
Well, you said it was built in the 80s, and I'm amazed it lasted almost 40 years.
Most of the drainage pipe in Morro Bay is CMP.
No, I'm sure it was back in the day because Caltrans was a big CMP people.
Yeah, in the 50s, a lot of the drainage pipe was put in.
Right. Okay, so it's not part of your specking.
No.
So that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tori, do you have any questions?
I do have a few questions. The smaller ones have to do with, let's say, on page 4, just the overall report of service requests completed and work orders completed. Before I make a request about that, I'm just wondering, I got some email and I noticed, Rob, you were on it this week, or it was last week, about broken bathrooms down at I think it was the Rock area. And I, as an public advisory board member, I'm just bringing that request from the citizens of Morro Bay to the council here.
So I believe that was referring to the Coleman bathroom that we recently shut and put the chain link fence around due to...
that is the Coleman bathroom?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, at Coleman Park, which is about halfway between the Rock and the
PG&E.
active part of the Embarcadero.
Yeah.
There's some swing sets there and a basketball court.
Okay.
So that's Coleman
Okay,
Park
good.
there.
Okay, good.
So we're assessing that restroom. Ideally, what we'll do is knock the wall down to maybe a 3-block section, attach that to the slab, and build up wood frame building on top of that to replace that. That would be ideal. We need to determine whether there's some differential settlement across that slab. Hopefully, there's some base underneath that thing there when they built it, but we're in the process of assessing that structure.
Would the design work for that rebuilding be done in-house, the city staff?
Yeah, that we did the Del Mar Park, worked with a local architect on kind of the critical ADA issues, but for the most part, our consolidated maintenance staff put it together. And it was a great project to do in-house. So we'd likely do some remodel on the inside of it to make it accessible, and which would involve, I think, taking the hand wash station and moving it to the outside, and then so we could make the stalls that would meet ADA.
Showers, or I forget if there's...
No, there's no showers in that restroom there. We get, during the busy part of the year, the Rock restroom is heavily used. And so we'll be doing we're looking at doing some retrofits there, going from manual flush toilets to automatic flush toilet, because there seems to be a fear of touching the flush button, because we find those toilets regularly not clogged but not flushed. Maybe they're afraid that the last person that touched it didn't wash their hands, or I don't know why people don't flush.
When do you think that will be completed?
Sometime during the off season, so this fall, winter, spring, and then be ready for the year. It's going to be a cost, so we'll likely need to go get authorization from council to expend that money.
Okay, thank you. Still on page 4 of 21, just the service requests completed. I want to just bring to the discussion on this report format if it would be possible or advisable to also list service requests received in the last period in addition to the service requests completed. And I don't really want to make more work for everybody involved, but it might be some indicator of, well, obviously response time of staff, but also level of service requests coming from the city. I mean, coming from the residents of the city.
I think we can work towards that now with our new maintenance program. We're learning more and more how to get the data out of that. So we'll see what we can put together that gives an indication of what the service level is and how much backlog there might be.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm also wondering about the Bartles Well secondary review of the fee schedules in light of some of the changes on the WRF project, and when should we expect a report from them? I'm not sure if I asked that in an earlier meeting, but the Bartles Wells.
Yes. So our financial consultant is working with our finance staff on reviewing. So we'll need that information to finalize the WIFIA loan documents.
Oh, okay.
So we're looking to submit that in October timeframe. So likely, fairly soon, we'll have the results of that.
Okay. Well, I'm one who's looking forward to that report. And then the last thing really is, another small item is I saw Caltrans at the 41 Main intersection last week. I think it was either one day or maybe... I
think it was 2 days.
2 days.
Restriping there.
Oh, was that all it was? I
Yeah.
thought it might have been involved with the roundabout.
No, all they were doing was restriping, refreshing the stripings. That's their maintenance responsibility there.
Yeah.
Now, the construction of a roundabout is the city's responsibility. They're the project managers on it, but we have to fund the project.
Yeah. Well, okay, gotcha. And then the last thing, which is the amendment made that was passed by the city council for the extra design services from the Waterworks Engineers LLC in Arizona to the tune of another almost $700,000 for that. The expansion on the conveyance system with an extra well and some more parallel pipes and things like that. I'm a little dismayed that there's a cost overrun like that. I'm just wondering would that lead to further cost overruns? I mean, it sounds like to me, if this is just at the early stages of the design of extra pipes and a second pump station and maybe some extra wells, that down the road actually building those is also going to be an extra over the baseline amount budgeted for the overall project.
The baseline budget included those additional features, so the 126 I'm rounding, it's 125 something, $126 million project, includes 2 pump stations, the conveyance system. And we had estimates for this engineering work that were in the budget. We were just finalizing contract negotiations with Waterworks engineers. So all this work was budgeted for in the council-approved budget. We just didn't have a contract amendment to authorize them to do the work. So it's within the estimates for soft costs on the project. We haven't exceeded those estimates yet. We have not, this is designed, so we're not touching the construction contingency on the project yet. So
one thing I'd like to add, Rob, to Tori's question is the fact there's a design build. They've gotten that from Black Phelan and et al. But this is a design bid build, so they do not have a price yet on the actual cost of getting the piping from one end to the other. They budgeted for it as part of an engineer's estimate, but they don't have a hard and fast contract, I guess is the best.
No, we'll go out to bid on this project
well, I just wanted to
spring of
explain
next
to
year.
him that, I understand where his concern was, because it's a fact, it could go more than $126 million if nobody bids low enough, or, to what the engineer thought. But of everything I've seen, the engineers have been very conservative in their numbers, because we were talking $170 million there for a little while, and now it's down to $126. So the reality is they were awfully conservative in all the engineering estimates. I think the design build came in a lot less expensive than was originally thought.
Yes, it did.
To come to. So I just wanted to fill that in for you, because
Just
I know
in
you're
the
not
nature-
familiar with some of that.
The contracting.
Yeah.
So, and there's some fairly large component of so-called soft costs in the.
Yes.
in
Well, the soft costs are the waterworks and all the engineering design. And Waterworks came back in because they weren't asked to do it. And I sat on the committee that, saw the scope of work. So I had no issue or problem with that aspect of
Okay.
it. They're asked to do additional work that wasn't put into the original contract from their end. But at the same time, they're still operating under where they need to be for the soft cost based on the budgeted amount. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Thank you, Steve.
Also, the lion's share of this contract amendment is for work that we would have had to have designed anyway.
Right.
We just moved it into, so we made the decision to put the reclaimed water line in the same alignment as the rest of the pipes. It didn't make sense to have another designer come in and design one of the 4 pipes, while Waterworks was designing the rest of the 3 in the same trench section. So we added that, and it won't be a component of when we go to design on the injection system. So
Hopefully not the same trench, but the same same
Corridor.
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 it'll be a very wide trench
Corridor,
with pipes at different elevations when they go to backfill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so 12 and a half feet wide is, I think, the ultimate trench section in the worst cases, and it'll be constructed likely with lead lag trench. So we'll do the dirtiest first.
Yeah, you do the
and then
lowest.
as we backfill, then come back in and put the cleaner water lines on top of those.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's it. So
All right, thank you,
you.
Tori
Thanks,
and
Rob.
Steve. I only have a couple questions. One, back on page 7 with the restroom. How old is that building, approximately?
Mike, do you have any idea how? Does it predate incorporation? It predates incorporation, so
Okay.
kind of looks like me.
Yeah. And,
Spanish.
and do you have a time estimate I know you're still gathering information on how to do it, but just a ballpark figure of when it might be opened up or repaired?
We would strive for, busy season next year to get it back open by. That's if we can use the existing foundation there.
Right.
If there's differential sediment settlement, we have to rethink our plan and basically raise the entire structure.
Right.
And start over with a new foundation.
Okay. On the comments that Linda Merrill had sent in the email, none of those were about the rock park, the rock.
Rock restroom.
Okay.
She has concerns
she
about
had concerns
them
about that. Yeah.
Being
Getting serviced.
overused
Right.
and clogged toilets. When our maintenance folks go out there, we rarely find clogged toilets. We find unflushed toilets,
Okay.
but that's why we're going to an automated flushing system out there. So kind of eliminate those issues. And, the restrooms do get busy on busy weekends.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Then on the next page, 8, dealing with the failed the sinkhole, the failed pipe. I believe I can understand the hole is in the bottom of the pipe, and the water going in flushed out rocks and things and undermined the surface above. Is that
That's correct.
pretty much how it happened?
Yeah.
So, okay.
So it washed the backfill underneath the road.
Backwashed
The road
it,
acted as a
right.
bridge for a certain amount of time before it
Collapsed, yeah.
collapsed.
Okay. Do we think there's other locations on that stretch of pipe that might be because of the grade and the type of pipe that might be in danger of that?
For the most part, it's in undeveloped easement area, that pipe.
Mm-hmm.
This is really, it only crosses the road. It's not in the road for a very long time. So
Okay.
this is the worst of the section. That's not to say that the rest of the pipe is probably in the same condition. It's a fairly steep pipe. There's a canyon upstream of it that has a lot of rock in it. Mm-hmm. That rock flowing down the bottom of that pipe erodes that metal and causes, exposes the steel. It
Right.
corrodes. More rocks go down.
Okay. Then on the next page, under water operations, it mentioned a power failure on the SCADA communication loss. How long was something like that, and what kind of impacts does that have?
It looks like Joe said it was well, he doesn't give the time for that. I don't know how long the time is. We can report back on that. Usually we have to have a crew member come in and operate things manually while we're rebooting the computer control system.
Okay. And a little further down, it mentioned about installed 9 new water services. What generates the city to go out and replace a person's water meter?
For the most part, they get replaced through new development. So somebody will be remodeling their home. It will trigger the installation of fire sprinklers.
Right.
So our older meters are a 3/4 by 5/8 inch meter. You can't get the required fire flow through that meter for a single-family home, so it has to be upgraded to a 1-inch meter. We routinely replace meters around town as they age. I think we have replaced all of our smaller mechanical meters.
And what generates that? Random here or there?
We have a schedule for meter replacement. So meters only last about 10 years.
Right. The reason I ask is because yesterday my water meter was replaced. Got my little tap on the door saying we're going to turn your water off, we're going to change the meter. They were saying it wasn't showing flow. And I'd say out of the last 5 months, I've only been home maybe about 3 weeks. So I've gotten several zero usage water bills. I was wondering whether water bills trigger that, or what might be the situation that happened to
It may have been an old mechanical meter that they
It was an older meter,
changed
yeah.
out, yeah.
But I'm just curious how that, you randomly determine what meters you're going to change on any particular day. I mean, he wasn't going down the street changing everybody on our street. I live in an older neighborhood, so just curious on how that surfaced.
Yeah, we have the schedule for the age of the meters. They're not all the same age, so
Right.
as you went down the street, they wouldn't be all the same age meters. When we do get zero reads, we do investigate that.
Good. Well, thank you. Yeah, besides not being around for most of the last few months, I also have about a dozen rain barrels, so that also contributes to my low water usage. Then, let's see. On the bicycle survey, when does that end? When is that going to be taken down? Do you have an idea? That would be on page 16.
Maybe by the end of the meeting, I will find that email and have a date for you.
Okay. And going back to what was already brought up about the speed problems there on San Jacinto and near Greenwood, I had commented, I think about a year or so ago, about changing the sign. It was being blocked. What was it? Slow down, school crossing sign was blocked by trees, and the city, instead of cutting into that person's tree, they moved the sign, which was great. But it looks like there's another tree that's been, possibly planted since then that looks like it's going to do the same thing to the sign and block that again. So I'm not sure what kind of situation we're going to be in with that. It's not blocking it now, but I noticed that I thought it was a great idea that they just move the sign a few feet closer so that it could be visible. And also on that street on San Jacinto, it seems like a speed hump or something would be a practical way to help slow down vehicles. I know that that's a main... Is it Collector Street?
That is a collector street,
right.
and typically you wouldn't
generally don't put obstructions on collector streets, but because of the nature of that particular intersection, with people coming down from Ironwood quite quickly down that steep hill, and then, like you say, it's a wide boulevard, so people coming up just sort of race up. That it seems there needs to be some sort of traffic calming device built on San Jacinto. I know there was talk a few years back about putting all these traffic calming devices and things on Greenwood, which really isn't a problem for people walking in the middle of the street. But for crossing that San Jacinto Street, that is San Jacinto is the problem. It's not the artery streets. Yeah.
Greenwood was one of the streets that would have qualified for a grant because it is a safe route to school. So that was one of the reasons why Greenwood was picked. And it being a pedestrian walkway, that is one of the few residential streets that would require sidewalks. As new development goes in, they either install the sidewalks or they request a deferral to install the sidewalks at a later date. Ultimately, Greenwood will have sidewalk on both sides of the street from Avalon to the north end.
Yeah, I know. I tend to disagree with that rationale because when you have sidewalks, if you look at the traffic accidents that have occurred in this town, pedestrian accidents, they've all been on streets where there's sidewalks as opposed to like out in our area where you don't have sidewalks. Cars tend to travel faster when people are not walking in the street on a regular basis. But anyway, that's a discussion for another time. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
Any other last questions? Yeah, it looks like John has one.
When I was doing some subdivision stuff in Alameda on, sand fill from the bay, the R value for that area tended to be in neighborhood of 70. Is that typical for the rock?
If it's beach sand, if it was built on beach sand, I haven't had good experience in getting good compaction on because it's all uniform size. We've had many pipe failures where the beach sand where you get a leak and the beach sand gets blown out of the trench. If they actually brought in some varying size material to put underneath there that they could consolidate and get some good compaction on, I think we're in good shape. But we're checking out the slab to make sure it's still level.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions from members? Then we'll thank you, Rob, and staff, and we'll go on to item B2, the short-range transit plan, and I'll hand it over to Janine Burlingame, our management analyst for this project.
Thank you and good evening. Yes, tonight you have the short-range transit plan that I'll be presenting. This plan is intended to provide a general plan or guide over a 5-year period to help in determining if there are any changes to the services that are being provided or how they're being provided, marketing, all designed to try to increase your ridership, it's therefore increasing your revenues or decreasing your operating expenditures, or to do things that might break down some barriers to riding, which would lead to more ridership. So the current plan was adopted in 2007, and shortly thereafter, the country went into a recession. And during that recession, it resulted in, over a couple of years, of some severe funding cuts from the state to the city, and that's where we get the majority of our transportation funding for operations. And what that resulted in was the city needing to adopt a new service method of delivery for our transit services here locally. And we went from a demand response service, the curb-to-curb service that was year-round all day long, to the deviated fixed route, which is the fixed route with those bump outs in various areas when people call in for a call-a-ride. And so we also still do our regular trolley service, but the main change when that occurred was on the demand response side to the deviated fixed route. So since the time we really haven't had gone through another short-range transit plan, the Council of Governments had tried to acquire a planning grant in order to do a new one. They weren't successful with that, and so ultimately the city had some of our local Transportation Development Act funds. We had enough available to put forward a project to do our own short-range transit plan. And so we started that towards the end of 2017, and is culminated over that time to the plan that you have before you to take a look at and provide some comments on as needed. LSC was hired as the transportation consultant, and they were awarded the contract and started work, as I mentioned, at the end of 2017. In addition, staff was also providing information to them, operational data for, I think it's like a 4 or 5 year period prior to that, on ridership statistics, the number of hours we operate, the types of services we operate. They also look at the other types of transit services that are available. They do onboard surveys as well as a community survey, so they're trying to reach both those who do do ride and those who do not ride, to find out, for those who are riding, what are their ridership characteristics, their pattern of behavior, where are they coming from, where are they going to, what times or days in the week. And then if they aren't riding, are there particular things that we could implement that would get them to start trying or utilizing the service. In addition, we helped them out with the onboard surveys and the boarding and alighting surveys. So determining each of our stops, how many people were getting on or getting off, if we were getting transfers between the regional system and our own or vice versa. And they also were looking at each year the Council of Governments holds an unmet transit needs hearing, and this is for all of the transit agencies within the county, and that's used to determine whether there are any potential unmet transit needs in a region, in our case in Morro Bay, that we might have some of our Transportation Development Act funds available for to enact that would take care of that unmet need. So they looked at the survey data, the operational data, as well as any potential unmet needs that were raised over that period of time, and they did an evaluation and analysis of that, and then from that came up with a number of potential alternatives. And those were presented at a community forum, and then a further winnowing down and evaluation of those were of kind of the best potential ones that would improve service or improve ridership. Those were then looked at and evaluated in terms of what is an estimated ridership that would get generated with this particular service alternative change, what is a potential cost added on to the existing services for that, and the potential for the fare box revenue. And looking at the large list and winnowing it down to the service alternatives that you see on pages 20 and 21 of your staff report. So for the most part, there's not a lot of really large expenditure items. I think probably the biggest one, just in terms of not so much cost, because it's really kind of cost neutral, is something on the transit system, the deviated fixed route, the fixed route call a ride service, which what they're calling a two loop. Currently, right now, that service runs on a loop that goes about an hour, and then depending on who's called and prearranged a trip to go off the loop in that particular area within that hour for pickup and drop off, and then comes back to City Park. But we come back to City Park once during that loop. The regional transit system that has a Route 12 and a Route 15 that goes to San Luis Obispo, to Los Osos, and north to San Simeon area, those services come to City Park twice in their 1 hour loop. And so what will happen is we have passengers who are wanting to get to the Route 12 to go to SLO or to Los Osos, but our times are not meeting fairly close to one another. So somebody may have a half an hour or a 40-minute wait, and that can be a lengthy period of time for people to wait and can be a barrier for ridership. So the two-loop idea is to break down our circular loop and kind of almost do kind of a figure eight, that we would come back to City Park twice within that hour, and with those two stops be much closer to those times when the regional system would be there to be able to make transfers a little easier and not have that longer term wait. The estimated ridership increase for that is between 450 and 470 passengers. And because we wouldn't be adding, we would do this with our existing bus. So as we're not adding hours or we're not adding an additional vehicle, which would be an additional driver in hours, there's no real change to operating costs there. So it would just be an additional passenger increase that we'd be looking to get from this, and some additional fare box from that.
Janine, can I just quickly ask,
Sure.
What's the percentage increase of that 450 to 470?
I think that was listed in when they were doing the alternatives in Chapter 6.
Because it sounds, that's a pretty significant increase. And
It's
if it's
about how many, we have Camille Watkins here with MV Transportation she knows a little bit more about what the day-to-day ridership for that, for the fixed route is. Over the course of a month, we're in the 1,400 range, 1,500? 14 to 1,600 passenger trips per month.
that's like a 30% to 50%.
We got to figure the annual ridership is about 17,000 to 20,000.
In that range.
450 is what percentage of 20,000?
Janine, could you repeat that?
So that's just on a per month, whereas this is talking about an
per year,
annual.
per year,
So when you're factoring in
Okay.
over the 12 months what
Right,
the total
it's not as
ridership
big.
is, it's a smaller amount, and it's every ride count. I mean, for our small system, every ride counts. We can have one passenger who rides daily.
Sure.
Not ride the system anymore, and that can over time, over the year, be a 1% change. So
Sure.
any additional things, and particularly something like this where you're not adding service cost to it,
Well, that's the beauty of it. It's just changing the route a little bit.
and then potentially having better connection times with the regional system that might even draw in some additional people, that all is a positive, potentially.
Thanks.
So the next service alternative that is being looked at for implementation is, same on the transit system, is to have the weekday and Saturday service extend by 1 hour. And this is another kind of a little bit more in ridership increase, and there would be an operating cost associated with that. But all the recommendations that we're going to talk about this evening will not have a significant impact to the overall fare box ratio of 10% that we are required to maintain by the state in order to retain certain transportation fundings. So when these alternatives were being evaluated, that was one of the factors that was being looked at, was how much of an impact that might have on that fare box ratio. And if it was not going to be a significant impact, then that was looked at more favorably. And so what this would do would be extend service on the weekdays to 7:45 and on Saturdays to 5:25. And the idea is that I think there was a trip coming from San Luis for commuters that is in that sort of that second hour after 5 o'clock. And the idea is that we might be able to generate some additional ridership from that, as well as if we're open a little bit later, then people might go and utilize it to go to restaurants in the evening, whereas right now they don't have really the ability to do so. The third option is, again, with the transit system, and this would be looking to doing what you call an on-demand stop request for the Natural History Museum. The campground is over that way, and so those can be some additional riders that when the trolley season is not in operation, those who aren't here during that season, but who still camp in the campground, it gives them some additional transit service options for them. And so we might see a generation of additional ridership from that. That's looking to be in the 720 to 750 passenger increase over the course of a year. And for, again, a small amount of operating costs with a subsidy of $790 over the course of a year. The only trolley item that was being looked at as a service alternative for consideration is earlier Saturday service. Currently, all days that the trolley operates in the season starts at 11 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of restaurants and even some shops open before that time. So there has been a request for opening earlier for the trolley services. And again, it would be a small generation of ridership increase and a small operating cost in the about the $1,300 range and about 700 passenger trips that would be per year. So those are all of the service alternatives that are being recommended for implementation over this 5-year period. And it should be noted that with ridership projections, they're just that. They're an estimate. They're a projection based on operating data and trip patterns and whatnot. We wouldn't actually know until we put the services out there and started doing the service what actual ridership might be. And so usually when you're enacting changes, it may take upwards of a couple of years to see that full yield of whatever ridership impact there might be. But you should be having some progress moving towards that. There should be some growth. So the consultant had indicated that if after 6 months of implementation of a particular item, if you evaluate it and your ridership targets are not progressing, if you're, say, not halfway to that annual ridership projection, then at that point in time you can drop that service because it's not probably going to meet the ultimate goal, and therefore you don't need to put some additional expenditures towards that. With regard to capital improvements, the capital element is basically identifying replacement vehicles. We're not looking to do any expansions of service or expansion of routes, so we're not looking to acquire new vehicles for that expansion. So the capital items are dealing with replacement and identifying in which years those would need to be replaced, and we would be seeking grant funding to do that. In addition, they had also suggested automatic vehicle location devices, AVLs, that could be used in conjunction with vehicle tracking apps such as NextBus or TripSpark, so that individuals could be able to see in live time where the transit vehicle currently is and have an estimate of when it might be arriving at that particular location. This would be helpful on the trolleys because we don't really have set time points or a schedule, and as we've had conversations in the past, the trolley can vary greatly, particularly on the waterfront, and how long it can take to get from the Rock just to Beach Street, let alone to make its full loop down to Tightlands Park and back. So this could give individuals who are waiting at a stop an opportunity to see, it's a block from here, so I can wait. Or, this is out at the Rock, and it's going to be 20 minutes, and maybe we'll go wander through some more shops or something before coming back and seeing if the trolley's here yet. The other item that is noted in the study but doesn't have a lot of cost information in there is the City Park Transit Hub improvements. You heard this at your last meeting. We had the study here with the site options. So we have a little more definition of a cost estimate. Again, this is also something that we'll be seeking grant funding for. And we have a State of Good Repair grant that has already been awarded for about $193,000 towards that project. And next February, we'd be applying for the remaining funding for that. So with that, as far as the fiscal impact, it should be noted that any of the recommendations that are provided in the short-range transit plan are contingent on the city receiving the revenue amounts that are being projected from the revenue sources that we get. We don't use any general funds for the transit division. The transit enterprise uses solely funds from the State Transportation Development Act, the Local Transportation Fund, and State Transit Assistance Funds. We now have State of Good Repair we get a small amount of funding from, as well as discretionary grant opportunity. We have a Rural Transit Fund grant that the Council of Governments oversees. It's basically a swap of some federal money with the RTA, who then provides state Transit Development Act monies. So we're able to access those on a much quicker basis than the federal funding, which can take a lot longer. And then our own local fare box and advertising revenue that we have on the trolleys. So we don't look to the general fund, and with whatever we have in the plan that's being promoted to put forward and implement, would all be utilizing those transportation funds and no general funds. So if we have a downturn in the economy that results in some of our Transportation Development Act funds getting cut back because not as many people are buying items which have a sales tax on it, which is what this fund is generated with, then we get a cut in funding, and so we would look to delaying implementation of a particular item or a particular capital item until such time as those revenues are available for it. So with the items, the service alternatives that I described earlier that are on page 20 and 21 of your staff report, the estimated annual operating cost for these is in the range between a little over $11,000 to a little over $12,000 over that 5-year plan. That's just the operating part. The capital component is estimated to be a little over $581,000. And as I mentioned, that number didn't include the city park transit hub study improvements. So that would be just for vehicle replacements over the 5-year period and the AVLs and any signage that we would need to be replacing. With regard to operating costs, the annual estimated fare box was generated between $2,400 and a little over $29,000, almost $3,000. We would be meeting the 10% fare box ratio, so we wouldn't be looking at any of these alternatives to having a detrimental effect. So we could move forward with implementing those in the time frame that's outlined in the plan. And with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to the board for any questions or comments you may have. Also to open it up for public comment in case there's anyone from the public who would like to comment on the plan or the service alternatives that are being provided. And then come back to the board. And staff is recommending that the board recommend the City Council adopt the short-range transit plan.
Thank you, Janine. Very good report. I'll start with questions on my right with Tori this time.
Okay. Can you, Janine, just define the fare box ratio? What is that?
It is a ratio of your operating costs to your fares.
The fares received.
Oh, well, your fares to your operating costs, the fares received.
Revenue to cost.
Yes. The state identifies what revenues can be included in with that calculation. So we have advertising revenue that is generated on the trolleys, and that is revenue that can be included in with our fares that help towards that calculation.
The advertising costs are part of the costs.
The advertising revenue that is generated. So we sell advertising signs on the vehicles.
That's part of the. That's the revenue.
That revenue that's
fair
generated.
revenue. That's considered fair revenue. That advertising.
It's a type of revenue that's factored into that calculation.
Right. Okay. No, I don't have. The only other question I might have here is, you clarified the operating costs annually. You said were, what was it? You had $581,000 for the capital cost, but what was the corresponding operating?
The operating would be in the range between $11,200 and $12,400 over the 5-year plan. So that $11,200 would be that first year's implementation, working up to, and each year would be going up a little bit, and so by the 5th year would be a little over $12,400 $400.
Is that mostly salaries and wages?
No, that would be, well, for those two items where we would be extending service, that would be driver cost. So it's the service hours that we're adding.
Yeah. And these are just the incremental costs?
Yes.
To
that particular service option that would be added.
Oh, these are annual operating costs per service item?
Right. Well, not per, but for the 5 total that I went over.
Okay.
Each one of those had a particular, like the two-loop option I had mentioned had really no impact, so there was no cost increase for that. The extending the transit system 1 hour, 5 days a week, and 1 hour on Saturday, that's so many hours over the course of a year, and then what that vehicle service hour rate is.
That rate, okay.
That rate applied to it. And then small amounts for fuel and maintenance.
Okay, right. So this 11,000 to 12,000 annual operating costs is just the incremental
to
extra cost
the
of those
existing
5 service options.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other question I just have is whether in this survey that you did with the consultant or any other data that you know of, do you have any idea of usage of public transit locally that is in connection to the SLO train station and the airport? How much ridership is related to people coming from or going to those two transportation hubs, so to speak?
So on the onboard survey, there's questions that are asked: where are you coming from? Where are you going to? Did you if you had to transfer from an RTA bus? And then there's also kind of an open-ended question: are there any transit services or transit locations that aren't provided right now that you would like to see provided? And that would, between those, would be an opportunity to indicate whether they needed service some way from the train station or the airport out to. I don't know offhand. That's something I'd have to go back and look in the appendix to see what some of the survey responses were, but there generally weren't a lot.
Yeah, I haven't done it here since living in Morro Bay, but I have used public transit to go, especially to airports, and there's other sources of information about that. I mean, one of them is just a proxy information of how much shuttle service occurs in our region to the airport. There are
some different services. Ride-On has an airport shuttle that I've actually used myself. Yeah. I live in Los Osos and have taken that. But if you were wanting to use like kind of pure public transit, you would have to go from a SLO city transit bus into downtown, SLO, transfer to an RTA bus to then come into Morro Bay, and then transfer onto a local service to get to your destination here locally.
I'm just thinking there might be demand. There might be a demand that has not shown up yet in that survey or other places that. If the new transit plans today or in the future adapt themselves to that hidden demand, that there would be ridership increases, for the services, and just something to consider, I guess. So, but that's all the questions I have. Thanks, Janine.
All right, thank you, Tori. Steve, do you have anything? I'll let you take up next.
Hey, Janine, I think you answered most all my questions. I just wanted to verify something. Okay. Basically, because it is a 5-year plan, you're not married to the plan if this extension of time does not work out. Is that correct?
Correct. So if funding revenues aren't met, then...
If the projections aren't met.
Or if projections aren't met and the particular service alternative that we've implemented is not looking like it's going to make it, then we would cut that. We're not, with council adopting this, it is not a requirement that every single element that is in here
be
gets
carried out or
be carried
can
out.
be rescinded.
Well, be carried out and be carried out in perpetuity. So
okay.
if it's not generating the estimated ridership, or if the cost is too much, if the fare box ratio, let's say it goes in the other direction for some reason.
So you're not making promises to anyone as a result of
Correct.
this. Oh, okay. And then the only other thing, and this is more an observation, I happen to be talking with the guy who runs the maintenance for RTA, and I brought up Morro Bay City Park site, the little kiosk there. He goes, they're in there every other day cleaning that thing out like nobody's business. And this was after we had last meeting where we talked about expanding this thing, and I guess I just have a little concern. You know, I assume it's the transient population that tends to, you know, dirty it up or whatever's going on. Maybe the same people that don't flush toilets down at the Rock. I'm not quite sure. But it's something to keep in mind when you do decide to enlarge that thing, that maybe it be more open to see everything going on inside, because right now it kind of has 3 walls around it, and the only people who could probably see in are the fire department.
And that's something that was noted when we did talk about the study last time, is one of the deficiencies with that particular shelter is that as the driver's approaching and a passenger sitting inside, they can't see one another until you're right on the thing.
Right.
And it also, with the large tree that provides a lot of shade, the cinder block walls, like you mentioned, there's 3 walls, and the way that the sun pattern is, it's very dark.
Yeah.
And so we would be looking at a structure that is not like that. It would not be cinder block construction that we would be replacing it with.
I'd say keep
and
it open.
Would be,
it'd be like a canopy.
It would be more open. So it would be more, we're looking at kind of more what you typically see these days as with transit shelters. They're more open, they're more transparent glass to where you can see through it, but you still have some shelter and protection from the elements. And so it would not have as much of that enclosed feel as it has right now.
Oh, okay. Well, just remember, if you go to plexiglass and stuff like that, that's just one more thing to clean, too. So don't make it too tough on yourself.
All right, thank you. John, do you have?
Yeah, I was trying to remember, what is the fare box ratio required in order to qualify for funding from the state?
The state requires, since we're deemed a rural area, our fare box ratio requirement is 10%. And we have been in the 12% range. And every year when we do our annual fiscal audit, that fare box ratio is calculated. And I think with the last, we're going to have auditors coming out in this next month to start work on our 18-19 audit. So the one prior to that, the 17-18 audit, we were still in the 12% range.
So it sounds like you have maybe $30,000 over that 10%. What you would 10% of 1.7 million would be $170,000 a year. Is that right?
Well, our operating budget is not nearly $1 million.
Okay, well, over the 5 years.
Over the 5 years.
Okay, so how much a year do you think how much play do you have between in your fare box ratio in dollars you think you have on an annual basis?
I don't have that particular dollar amount at this time. In the financial plan area, they do have a table that looks at those different options and the dollar amounts for those options and the fare box ratio. over the life of the plan, it wasn't going to impact that significantly, so we wouldn't be approaching that 10%. But I don't know in terms of dollar amount what that is at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, I just have a couple questions. One is just one of those little, not quite on the subject, but still on the subject. It mentions, that there are a total of 638 households below the federal poverty level, 13% of the total households. What is the federal poverty level? I think when they make a statement like that, they should at least give me some sort of idea of, is that federal poverty level $100,000 a year, $50,000, $10,000? Because really, that's kind of statement is sort of meaningless when I'm trying to evaluate that. I know that, you probably don't have that information off the top of your head, but thinking in the future, when you do future reports, if you're going to say a certain percentage of the federal, poverty level,
To know what that is.
to know what it is in this day and time.
And I can
appreciate
request that they add like a little parentheses with that number or a footnote.
It would be helpful for somebody like me who really has no idea.
What does that mean in terms of
Let's see. Our current contract is, we're nearing the end of the 5-year contract with our current provider. Were they the same contractor prior to the current contract, or how frequently has the contracts changed?
We would have gone out to bid prior to this contract. We had gone out to bid, and MV Transportation was awarded the contract. They're the current contract provider. They were the contract provider for the previous contract that we had, and that was about, I think it was a 5-year or a 3-year contract with 2 1-year extensions, I believe. So it was about a 5-year total contract. We are in our last year of our present contract, and we have a 1-year extension we are looking to enact. And then next year we will be going out to bid for a new, potentially a new contractor for services that would start in 2021.
All right, thank you. Let's see, what else? Talking about the flag stops, eliminating flag stops and adding a couple of the popular flag stops as regular bus stops. How many flag stops are there? I mean, is it basically anybody that's on the route can just stick their hand out and flag the bus down? Is that the way it currently is?
That's the way that it currently is. And when we were doing the onboard surveying, so I was riding on the vehicles throughout the whole day and marking where people were getting on and off, not just at the designated stops that we have listed, but also if there was a flag stop and where that location was. And the idea was to determine whether a flag stop had it generated enough people at that particular location that it may warrant it being put in as just a regular stop. And the issue that we've had with flag stops is that a lot of times there's confusion with the passenger doesn't know exactly how do you flag a vehicle. They are not aware of safety issues, so where they're not even probably thinking about that, but what the driver has to do is, if they see them, they have to make a pretty quick decision of, is this a safe location to be able to pull the vehicle over and load the passenger. And so if it is not a safe location, the driver passes on, the rider thinks the driver just drove by me. And that's and so you would call and get a complaint about that. And so there's a safety issue with the flag stops. So that was sort of the genesis for looking at kind of eliminating that as an option. And pretty much all other transit agencies don't do flag stops for those very reasons, is that it's a potential safety issue. And then you have that confusion amongst the passenger. Yeah, okay. Did they pass me by? Yeah. And that's bad service, they think, or did they not? They don't think along the lines of, well, maybe they didn't see me, or maybe it wasn't safe. And so looking at trying to identify, are there some flag stop areas that have enough ridership, that is a safe location that we could turn into an actual stop, might help alleviate that, and then eliminate the flag stops as an option entirely.
Great. Yeah, I understand that now. On the idea of, turning some of those flag stops into regular stops and looking at the descriptions of a couple of the other stops as far as amenities, I think it would be a good idea that wherever we have a stop, that we have benches. And I'm wondering if we could have address that cost as we do with other benches in town, where someone can purchase a memorial or a dedicated bench, on the transit route, because there are some areas that they do have a lot of people, but it's discouraging if you're having to stand there, especially if you're going to be standing there for a while. So I think that's something to consider. Do we have, when we were doing the benches a while back, about the ones at the Rock and in different parks, is that strictly limited to those particular locations, or is that something that we could easily incorporate into bus routes?
In terms of memorial benches, we can certainly offer that. I was going to note that the transit industry has some standards on bus stop amenities, and when benches may be warranted, when shelters may be warranted, and whatnot. And so we can take a look at those standards and the existing stops that we have and see where things like a bench might be appropriate to add and incorporate in. The other thing we would need to be looking at is the location where that is, and ADA issues with regard to that as well. And so we would rope engineering into that discussion. And if we do determine that benches would be warranted in a particular location, we would be looking at, we'd be looking to our transit funding and getting grants, transportation grants, to be able to fund that. Or if we open it up as a memorial, that is another option.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Could you give me a little clarification on how the transfers work right now? I didn't quite see that in the report. Is that additional cost transferring system to system? If you're not doing a monthly pass thing, if you're just catching a bus here and transferring to city buses in San Luis or something?
Well, there is a regional pass, which if a rider has the regional pass, they are allowed to ride on any fixed route transit system. So they could ride on our local system, the RTA bus. If they ride into SLO, they can ride SLO Transit, and the SCAT buses down in South County. So they don't need to have a specific transfer because that pass would in essence be like that. There's also a regional day pass that is also the same, acts as the same thing as a transfer. If you don't have one of those passes, then you would be paying each individual system whatever that particular rate is.
There's no reduced rate because you're transferring from one system to the next.
If you buy if you know you're going to be riding the regional system and our system, and maybe once you get into SLO, you're going to ride the SLO system to where you need to go, you could buy a day pass that would be kind of a discounted rate by the time you used it and came back.
This is available from the drivers?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any.
And then I don't know if Camille may.
The regional day pass is only available from the RTA drivers. The Morro Bay Transit, we have our own day pass that is available from the Morro Bay Transit driver.
So what Camille was saying is that the regional system, the regional drivers have the regional day passes that they can issue. Our local system, we have our own day pass, but it's only good on our service. And the passes can be purchased at the Public Works Department. So they can get the regional pass, whether it's the day or the 31-day or any of the other RTA passes.
Okay, so if I wanted to go from my house to the city park to San Luis, first I have to get to Public Works, which is right beside. Yeah, I can't do it all in one purchase. I have to get on the bus, get to your place, and then buy a pass again to get into San Luis. Okay.
Yeah. And we don't sell the regional day passes.
The Public Works does.
We do.
This is a part of the public record.
I'm sorry?
I need to be up.
Okay. I apologize. I'm not used to being at this kind of function. The regional pass, the day pass, and the 31-day regional pass, they are available from RTA and from Public Works, but not on the Morro Bay Transit bus. They are required to be validated, which means they have to have a date stamp on them. We don't have that capacity on our buses. And this also gives the passenger the opportunity to buy passes in advance and not have them start expiring until they use them. In your situation, sir, if you get on the bus in front of your house, on our bus, and you were going to go to regional transit bus and buy a day pass, there's an issue about whether or not the pass has been validated. We are required by contract to enforce the fare at time of service. So,
And one of the
That's
things
what I
that we've
thought,
been,
yeah.
one of the things that we were looking in, which I don't believe is addressed so much in the short-range transit plan, but that we've talked about internally, is looking at automated fare boxes. So the regional system, slow transit system, the larger systems, they have those automated fare box vaults to where the pass goes in, gets printed on. We've been talking about looking at the possibility of getting some sort of system like that, so that then we could issue and have it validated for the future. But for right now, we don't have something other than if we were to hand write on the pass, but that's meaningful only to us, not
Right.
the regional system.
Okay, that's the way I understood it and thought that was. I just see that as a, like I say,
And
future
without-
deficiency.
Without the validation, you can't prove to anybody that you paid your fare.
Oh, I understand that.
And
Yeah, I appreciate
because we do have
that,
fare
yeah.
box recovery ratios that are very imperative for us to maintain. Every fare needs to be collected at time of service. So,
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do appreciate that. And that does clarify that as a need that will at some time need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. No more questions from
And
the...
I was just going to say that for the most part right now, those who, we don't usually get a lot of transfers back and forth between the two systems. The RTA generates a lot of ridership to that city park stop they're getting off and getting on. Not a lot of them transfer between the two. So the question hadn't come up previously, like in the surveying work, that transfers was an issue, because most of those individuals who are transferring are multiple use riders, and so they already have a regional pass that they've been purchasing and utilizing. But in a situation like what you're talking about, which is somebody who may ride it more infrequently, that is something that we can talk about internally and see if there's some other way that we could try to address that particular issue and need.
Yeah, I just see this as it's a spur of the moment. Oh, I got to get into San Luis, so I will be paying two fares, one to get to the
one on the local
city
system
park,
and then one on the regional
right,
system.
on the other one.
But on the way back.
Yeah.
But on the way back,
good. Thank you.
But at that point, it might not make sense to buy that day pass.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's a certain dollar amount, and so when you factor how many rides is that going to be to make that worthwhile versus just paying the cash fare.
Okay, it's something to think about in the back of your minds.
Yeah.
That's the idea. That's the reason for the question. Let's see. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And Janine, did you say that you wanted some final comments, or should I give it back to the board for some comments?
Just to return back to the board if you
Okay.
had any additional comments
Looks like
or
John-
questions.
Looks like John has a question.
I had one question about this automated vehicle location. Would there be a module in My Morro Bay in order to access that information if it's brought in? Or is that outside of the possibility of the current software you have?
We currently don't have any software, so we would need to be looking into what types of systems are out there and what would be the most appropriate one to utilize for our location. And so we would also be seeking grant funding for the acquisition of that, the software program and the modules that are used on the actual vehicle.
Now,
And that data would all be internal to the city. So the app would be what would connect to that AVL data to be able to then show the person who has that particular app where the vehicle might be at that particular point in time.
okay. So, I guess the question I have is, does the current Public Works system for My Morro Bay?
No.
It doesn't have that capability now, but it can link to other apps. So if we had that capability on the transit system, you could, and the AP, now we're getting in over my head. I know the letters, but I don't actually know what they mean. The API, the device that talks between the two apps, if that's publicly available, then yes, you could link those two apps together.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, did you have something? Okay.
I was ready to go ahead and make a motion to
Go right ahead.
recommend that the city council adopt the short-range transit plan.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that presentation
Thank you.
and all of the work that you did putting into it. And I saw that one about your public meeting about a year ago where only 3 people showed up, and I think that's sort of a typical response here in Morro Bay. No matter how much you advertise, people don't go out to a lot of these preliminary meetings. It's not until after something's been implemented that people start saying, really, I never knew about any of this stuff. But I think this is, you got some good feedback, it sounds like, from that meeting.
Between the community forum we had and the onboard surveying that we did, and we even had an online community survey that we did get some responses back on. Getting responses from the public, good or bad, and I've been here more than 25 years, and it's always a struggle to try to get input from the public on transit services. So any information we can get, we're happy to take. And this is something that it's an opportunity to put out there that, like you mentioned, there is a process and we can give some input. This isn't, as I mentioned, it's not going to be something static in perpetuity, that it's only going to be this for a particular period of time. Our transit services are ever evolving, so if somebody has questions, if somebody wants to recommend particular services that we may not have, or an idea that they may have, they can I'm more than happy to take that information and we can look at that, and then that can get incorporated into future years' short-range transit plans to further develop the transportation system. The whole idea is getting riders out of their cars and going from single trips into many, multiple trips in one vehicle. So that's the idea behind it. And any barriers that we can eliminate, reduce, or alleviate in order to do that, that's where this document kind of lives and breathes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Rob, do you have any future agenda items you'd like to identify at this time?
the continuing reports on activities through the director's report. I don't have any specific items at this time.
Okay.
I do have an update on when the survey closes for the bicycle. It closed this last Sunday, but I noticed it's still open, so if you want to do it, I would not delay any further. The federal poverty level is not a number, unfortunately. It's a big chart, and it depends how many are in the household and what percent of the federal poverty level. So it's not as simple, perhaps, as a number.
Income level. Yeah. No, it's gone under, in the last 20 years, it's been more. There's been a real expansion of what the poverty level is, and it has come out to being multiple measures that go into it.
Is that dependent on regions of things, or?
Yeah, it's a standard set of measures that then is applied at regional levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Let's see, John, looks like you have a hand there.
Yeah, there's a agenda item I'd like to see sometime is, do you keep a list of, the Army used to call it unfunded requirements. Like, is there something which, if you had the money, you would do it? Do you have a list of those sort of projects?
We have with this year's capital budget, we have a list of unfunded capital projects in that in the budget. So we can next director's report, I'll provide a list of those.
Okay. Does that include maintenance and?
No, it's just construction projects or major maintenance type projects. We do carry a list of deferred maintenance projects, our wish list, and if we had an income stream available, we would tick off that next one, like probably the roof on this building.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I will adjourn the meeting to our regular October 16th, 2019 Public Works Advisory Board. Thank you.